The war room in the Reich Chancellery bunker hummed with tension as Adolf Hitler stood before a massive map of the world, his finger tracing lines across the Atlantic Ocean toward the eastern seaboard of the United States. It was December 1941, just days after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor had brought America into the war, and the Führer was sketching out visions of German conquest that bore no relation to reality. Around him, his generals and admirals stood in varying states of attentiveness, some genuinely listening, others having learned to adopt expressions of interest while their minds calculated the impossible logistics of what their leader was proposing. Hitler spoke with the fervor that had captivated millions, describing how Germany would strangle American commerce, how the Luftwaffe would eventually develop bombers capable of reaching New York and Washington, how the decadent mongrel nation across the Atlantic would crumble once faced with the superior will and racial purity of the Third Reich. He painted America as a paper tiger, a nation of materialistic weaklings led by Jews and corrupted by democracy, incapable of standing against the united strength of the Axis powers. What Hitler could not see, what his ideology prevented him from understanding, was that he had already lost any chance of defeating America before the first shot was fired. The reasons were not primarily military, though military factors would prove decisive. The reasons were rooted in something more fundamental: the nature of American industrial capacity, the character of American geography, the reality of American resources, and the catastrophic mismatch between Nazi ambitions and Nazi capabilities. Grand Admiral Erich Raeder stood silent as Hitler outlined his fantasies of Atlantic domination. Raeder commanded the Kriegsmarine, Germany's navy, and he understood naval warfare with the expertise of 4 decades of service. He knew things that Hitler either did not know or refused to acknowledge. The German surface fleet was minuscule compared to the combined naval power of Britain and America. The Navy possessed no aircraft carriers, while America was already building them by the dozens. Germany's capital ships could be counted on 2 hands. America's shipyards were preparing to launch hundreds of vessels. The U-boat fleet, which Hitler spoke of with such confidence, numbered fewer than 200 operational submarines at the war's outbreak. Raeder had pleaded for years for permission to build more, for resources to expand the submarine force to the 1,000 boats he estimated would be necessary to truly threaten Atlantic shipping. But those resources had been diverted to the Army, to the Luftwaffe, to the grandiose building projects that fed Hitler's ego. Now, with America entering the war, the industrial disparity would become catastrophic. Raeder could do the mathematics in his head. America possessed steel production capacity nearly 10 times that of Germany. American shipyards could construct vessels at rates that German yards could not match, even in peacetime, let alone while under constant aerial bombardment. For every U-boat Germany built, America could build a dozen destroyers and escort vessels. For every ton of Allied shipping the submarine sank, American yards could replace it twice over. The Battle of the Atlantic was a race between German sinking capacity and Allied building capacity, and the Allies were already winning before the race truly began. But raising these points with the Führer was dangerous, potentially fatal. Hitler did not tolerate pessimism from his subordinates. He interpreted factual assessments of limitations as defeatism, mathematical reality as moral weakness. Generals and admirals who too persistently pointed out the impossible nature of his demands found themselves removed from command, or worse. So, Raeder remained silent, making mental notes about how to phrase his written reports in ways that might communicate reality without triggering fury. The fundamental problem was one of distance and scale that Hitler's continental mindset could not grasp. Europe was a place where armies could march from one capital to another in weeks, where supply lines stretched hundreds of kilometers, not thousands. The Atlantic Ocean was 5,000 kilometers of hostile water, swept by storms, patrolled by enemy vessels and aircraft. Beyond it lay a continent that dwarfed Germany in every measurable way. America possessed 3 times Germany's population, most of it far younger and healthier than the German population after 4 years of war and decades of economic hardship. American territory spanned 4 million square kilometers of the most resource-rich land on Earth. Vast oil fields in Texas and California, coal deposits in Appalachia, iron ore in Minnesota, copper in Montana, rubber plantations in its Pacific territories. Nearly every strategic resource necessary for modern warfare existed in abundance within America's borders or those of its nearby allies. Germany, by contrast, was perpetually short of everything. It had limited domestic oil production and depended on synthetic fuel plants and Romanian imports. It lacked natural rubber and had to produce synthetic substitutes. Its iron ore came largely from Sweden, vulnerable to naval interdiction. Its agricultural base could barely feed its population, even with imports from occupied territories. Every strategic material was rationed, every resource carefully allocated, every production decision a choice between competing critical needs. Hitler's ideology prevented him from understanding the implications of this disparity. He genuinely believed that racial superiority could overcome material disadvantage, that the mongrel Americans, corrupted by democracy and Jewish influence, lacked the will and coherence to mobilize their resources effectively. He pointed to the American performance in World War I, where it had taken over a year for the United States to field a significant army in Europe, as evidence of American military incompetence and industrial sluggishness. What he failed to understand was that America in 1917 had been unprepared for war.
But America in 1941, while still technically at peace, had been preparing for war for over 2 years. The Lend-Lease program had already transformed American industry into an arsenal of democracy. Factories that had built automobiles were retooling for tanks. Aircraft plants were expanding exponentially. Shipyards were operating around the clock. The administrative frameworks, the supply chains, the training programs were already in place. Within months of Pearl Harbor, American industrial mobilization would achieve outputs that seemed impossible even to Allied planners. In 1942, American factories would produce 47,000 aircraft. By 1944, that number would exceed 96,000. American shipyards would launch merchant vessels faster than U-boats could sink them, constructing Liberty ships in an average of 42 days. The scale was beyond anything in human history. By 1943, America would be producing more war material than all the Axis powers combined. It would be building a major warship every day, an aircraft every 5 minutes. Its assembly lines would manufacture tanks by the thousands, trucks by the tens of thousands, rifles by the millions. The productive capacity that Hitler dismissed as the achievement of a degenerate race would become an unstoppable avalanche of material that would bury the Wehrmacht beneath its weight.